Heya Cryptozens, it's 10 p.m. Pacific time. My name is Nikodemus, and welcome back to the Crypto Overnighter, where we take a nightly look at the crypto, NFT, and metaverse space. And keep in mind, nothing in this show should ever be considered financial advice. It's November 16th, 2020. Welcome to the halfway mark of the week. Hope your week is going well. Let's get to it. Did you ever do something, like make a mistake or date the wrong person or whatever, and then someone snidely remarks, if you'd listened to me, this wouldn't have happened, or if you'd just done X and Y, this wouldn't have happened? I hate those people. Well, now we will never truly know if the markets in crypto assets law in European Union would have prevented the FTX crash. EU lawmakers disagree whether or not MiCA would have helped to prevent against the worst of the effects or not. Some EU officials think that the Market in Crypto Assets Act would have helped huge in protecting EU citizens from the damage done by FTX's implosion. Some, but not all. Andrej Karvik is a member of the European Parliament. Not only that, but he is also a co-author on the bill. And he is not convinced that MiCA would have cushioned or prevented the effects from FTX. He said, quote, I don't see exactly how MiCA would have been able to fully stop or prevent this. I can imagine that some aspects of it would be mitigated or alleviated. It would be too simple to just say that only crypto asset regulation would solve this. People are bringing this up because risk management is a component of the MiCA framework. Part of it outlines the licensing process for crypto service providers. And in that process are requirements on things like risk management or the segregation of client and firm funds, as well as prudential requirements and the disclosure of conflict of interests. It's believed that this could have been relevant in addressing several issues leading up to FTX's collapse, all of which is pure speculation, given that MiCA still isn't active yet. And while Stefan Berger claims, quote, MiCA is the bulwark against Lehman Brothers moments such as the FTX case, that doesn't quite cover it for Kovarik, though. Quote, the real causes of the crash also lie somewhere else than what a crypto asset regulation can actually cover. And he points out that the ongoing effects of the FTX crisis has not been limited to just FTX. He's talking about how tightly woven the relationships between crypto companies tend to be. He said, quote, we are talking about quite a high number of companies that were operating together, and that's quite a broad financial services ecosystem. Now, from his point of view, he's saying that this story needs more time to be told. Quote, we should first analyze what exactly happened in this case and whether this is something that can be fully resolved by only adjusting the regulatory framework on crypto assets. So, from one warning to another, we've got the U.S. Justice Department doing a little warning of its own. They don't want lawyers tipping off their clients about potential investigations against them, which seemed kind of backwards to me when I read about it. I would think that lawyers are supposed to protect their clients. Sanjeev Bhaskar is a lawyer for the DOJ specializing in digital currency. He was speaking in D.C. at an event put on by the Blockchain Association when he said if the government sends over paperwork dealing with a subpoena or a search warrant or something like that, you can't tell your client about it. The government doesn't want lawyers warning their clients so they can take the money and run. They don't want the lawyers tipping them off. It's called an anti-tip-off provision. And like some regulators, Bhaskar has some reservations where DeFi is concerned. He said, quote, what is DeFi? And is something truly decentralized? And if something is labeling themselves as decentralized in nature, is that true? Are there centralized attributes? New York regulators are also serving up their own warnings, but not to clients and attorneys, to Congress. Adrienne Harris is the superintendent of the New York Department of Financial Services. She was speaking today at the Brookings Institute in Washington, D.C., and she wants Congress to take a look at the rules that her state has put in place, at least when it comes to a national model. And she also warned against federal laws undoing the work that the states have already put in. She said, quote, when we go to the Hill, we say we want there to be a state path. We would like for there to be a framework nationally that looks like what New York has, because I think it is proving itself to be a very robust and sustainable regime. Harris also brought up concerns that the federal legislation would override or preempt the rules and regulations that states have already put in place where crypto is concerned. And of course, New York's licensing regime came up. It's believed to be one of the most stringent in the country. Most of the time, people treat that as a negative, but not everyone. Peter Martin is the agency's virtual currency chief, and he points out that FTX US never actually got a license, so they were never legally able to operate in New York. Apparently, they had a pending application, but it was pending. Quote, I want to acknowledge first and foremost that FTX US was not operating in New York. And so what Harris is worried about are the recent proposals that would change federal regulations. This would mean developing a federal payments license instead of the patchwork state-by-state money transmitter licenses that crypto firms currently have to obtain to work in those states. Meanwhile, you have lawmakers in the Senate seemingly eager to grant one federal agency or another greater authority over exchanges that let people trade in digital commodities. The concern is that, at least in some cases, federal licenses will override state licenses like New York's BitLicense. Now, staying with New York here, we're going to the New York Innovation Center that's a part of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Proving that FTX isn't everything everywhere all at once, a group of banking institutions have announced a new proof of concept. These banks, including HSBC, MasterCard, and Wells Fargo, are working on a digital money platform called the Regulated Liability Network, or RLN. And so the New York Innovation Center is working with these commercial banks on a platform that uses distributed ledger technology to improve financial settlements. This could see participation from commercial banks, regulated non-banks, which are things like BNY Mellon, Citi, and US Bank, as well as central banks. So their plan for this pilot project is to run for 12 weeks, and everything will be denominated in US dollars. These will be simulated digital tokens used to process customer deposits and settle through simulated central bank reserves on a blockchain. So it's a blockchain-backed CDBC. The fact that it's on the blockchain does not make me feel any better. I'm just saying. It doesn't mean that the central bank won't have utter and complete control over the CDBC and how it gets used. It just means that whatever the central bank does, there'll be a record of it. So what they're saying is that this project will have a regulatory framework that already includes things like a know your customer process and anti-money laundering requirements. It's also meant to test the feasibility of including other digital assets on the platform, specifically stablecoins. The group notes state that the project will be working in a test environment only, so they're not doing what China did recently and handing out real money to test with. They're a long, long way from that. They also said, quote, it is not intended to advance any specific policy outcome, nor is it intended to signal that the Federal Reserve will make any imminent decisions about the appropriateness of issuing a retail or wholesale CDBC, nor how one would necessarily be designed. Now, just for fun, let's hop in the Wayback Machine. Specifically, let's talk about that time frame between May 8th and May 12th, and a completely different billionaire and a completely different implosion. I'm talking about Do Kwon, Terraform Labs, and the Luna Foundation Guard. There have been a number of accusations and allegations of the misuse of funds when they were trying to defend UST by keeping it on its peg. So Terraform Labs and the LFG commissioned a technical audit of their actions. They said this audit was supposed to clear up, quote, allegations posted in social media. So what were the results? We know they weren't successful in their attempt to defend UST, so what's in the report? The audit was conducted by the consulting firm JS Held, and the auditors say that LFG spent over 80,000 Bitcoin and almost $50 million in stablecoins to defend the peg. That's about what LFG said that they spent in their tweets that they sent out on May 16th. So that's LFG. Terraform Labs spent around $613 million to defend the peg. Now keep in mind, this is just an audit. It just says what money was spent where. It doesn't say whether those actions were right or wrong, just what they did. So let that be the lens through which you view LFG's conclusions. Because LFG is saying that the results show that there was no misuse of customer funds. They also claim that the results showed that there was no insider that benefited. One of the things that they do address is the allegation that says LFG's funds were frozen by law enforcement. Instead, they say, quote, all LFG funds are kept in self-hosted wallets, have not moved since the May 16th tweet, and have not been frozen. Which is a curious statement to make. Curious and completely unsupported by the facts. What makes it interesting is that South Korean police requested LFG's funds to be frozen on May 23rd. And then again, in September, South Koreans asked KuCoin and OKX to freeze over 3,000 Bitcoin from a wallet that was created on September 15th. This wallet was created in the name of the Luna Foundation Guard. Do Kwon, of course, is in the middle of all this, facing criminal charges and his current whereabouts unknown. Well, the LFG blog quotes him as saying, it is important to distinguish between Terra's case, where a transparent, open-source, decentralized stablecoin failed to maintain peg parity, and its creators spent proprietary capital to try to defend it, and failure of centralized custodial platforms where its operators misused other people's monies, customer funds, for financial gain. So he's taking shots at SBF while he is hiding from Interpol. He also announced the audit in a tweet from yesterday. In that thread, he said, quote, many of you lost a lot of money in UST. For this, I'm sorry. While the system was transparent and open source, I, as its creator, should have understood and communicated its risks better. Of course, even with all the other events happening in the crypto space right now, the FTX implosion is still having an effect, some with unexpected casualties. Genesis Global is one of those unexpected casualties. And keep in mind, Genesis Global is also responsible for providing liquidity for the Grayscale Bitcoin Investment Trust. And so they put out a tweet today that said that they were going to, quote, temporarily suspend redemptions and new loan originations in the lending business. As far as why, they cited the common refrain of unprecedented market turmoil, their words. They said the events kicked off by FTX's collapse resulted in what they called abnormal levels of withdrawals. Genesis Global says that the levels of those withdrawals have exceeded their liquidity. And not only FTX. They said part of their current liquidity crisis comes from our friends at Three Arrows Capital. As part of the bankruptcy proceedings, they filed a $1.2 billion claim against 3AC. So here's the problem. Genesis Global has $175 million worth of funds stuck on FTX. The parent of Genesis Global is Digital Currency Group. Digital Currency Group gave Genesis Global $140 million in equity to cover the losses. It appears that $140 million wasn't enough. They said, quote, we have hired the best advisors in the industry to explore all possible options. Next week, we will deliver a plan for the lending business. We're working tirelessly to identify the best solutions for the lending business, including, among other things, sourcing new liquidity. Now, Genesis Global is the lending partner for the crypto exchange Gemini. They're the ones behind Gemini's Earn program. And so Gemini confirms that Earn will not be able to meet customer redemptions in the next 5 business days. That said, Gemini points out that the Earn program was completely separate. They said that this doesn't affect their other offerings. They said, quote, all customer funds held on the Gemini exchange are held one-to-one and available for withdrawal at any time. Meanwhile, the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust issued a statement of their own. Quote, all Grayscale products remain safe and secure, held in segregated wallets in deep cold storage by our custodian, Coinbase. And Coinbase came out with their own statement. They said that they have no exposure to Genesis Global. Now, meanwhile, California's Department of Financial Protection and Innovation said today that they were suspending Salt's license for 30 days. They're doing this while they're investigating their decision to halt client withdrawals. This is after yesterday's announcement that Salt was pausing client withdrawals and deposits, largely due to the effects of FTX's implosion. This is much like what they just did to BlockFi, when BlockFi decided to halt withdrawals due to FTX. Oh, and they're investigating FTX as well. Meanwhile, Bank to the Future announced that they were terminating their own plans. They had issued a non-binding letter of intent to buy Salt. Well, that's off due to FTX contagion. And finally tonight, former President Donald J. Trump announced his third run for the White House. He was at his Mar-a-Lago estate when he announced his second attempt at re-election. I would be foolish to pretend that Trump doesn't have an effect on public discourse. I can only reiterate my position. This show is about crypto, and so I'll be reporting on U.S. politics, but only so far as crypto is a part of the story. Now, frankly, I don't expect Trump to figure heavily in our conversations here, at least not unless he does get reelected. So let's take a look, because the 45th president doesn't seem to have a high opinion of crypto. In 2019, he said he wasn't a fan of Bitcoin or other crypto technologies. And more recently, he's called cryptocurrency a scam. Now, in that sense, he's departing from mainstream conservative groups who've really gotten active in crypto since Trump left office. The Club for Growth, a conservative group, recently launched 2 crypto super PACs. This group also endorsed Trump in 2016 and 2020, so we'll see how he feels about it. Perhaps during the campaign, we'll get an opportunity to see if Trump has evolved in his views, as have many of his conservative contemporaries. And that's going to do it for us on a Wednesday night. I want to thank you, my listeners, because when you stop listening, I will stop talking. We'll see you tomorrow night.